بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope everybody's doing well, and apologies for the slight delay. I was not expecting any snow, subhanAllah, and I don't think many people were expecting snow, so the roads were a little bit bad. So anyhow, let's not waste any more time. Last week we began the discussion about what was taking place inside Medina, along with the movements of the army from Quraysh and Ghatafan and how where they settled down. We talked about some of the miracles that took place, along, while the trench was being dug by the Muslims. We mentioned it was a time of hardship. We mentioned the miracle where they experienced the barakah of the food of Jabir ibn Abdullah, the dates, and all of these things, right? So we mentioned several things, and we basically stopped last week, if I recall correctly. The Quraysh and the Ghatafan had just arrived and settled down, and they still were not expecting to, of course, see a trench. But as expected, and as we mentioned, they were quite shocked, and they were, of course, very angry and irritated when they came to attack. But they were faced with a trench. This was something completely unexpected to them. Like, this is something literally they have never seen anything like this before. As we mentioned, the concept of digging a trench during a time of siege and battle was something completely unknown to the Arabs. And the books of Seerah, they mention, and it says, وَأَخَذَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ يَدُورُونَ حَوْلَ الْخَنْدَقِ غِضَابًا, that they were very upset, they were very angry, and so they started marching back and forth along the trench. And why? They were trying to look for a weak point. They wanted to see if they can find a weak point. But anytime they would come closer to the trench, at any point in the trench, the Muslims would shoot arrows at them. They would shoot arrows at them and try to keep them away. Which, by the way, subhanAllah, is so much more difficult than you would think. Now, in a normal battlefield like Badr or Uhud, okay, you have a limited space where most of the soldiers are fighting in. You're talking about a long trench. So 24 hours, this trench has to be actively guarded in every single spot. Because at any time, the Muslims stop guarding any spot in the trench, the Quraysh or the enemy could take advantage of that gap, and they could maybe fill it in with some soil, enough to allow their horses to be able to jump over the trench and to make it to the other side. So it was a tough job to have to try and defend any approaches onto the trench. And also, we had mentioned the trench itself is not perfect, right? Something that the Muslims, they tried their best and they gave their best effort to do within the time that they had to dig the trench, but the trench was not perfect. It's understandable that maybe some areas maybe are a little bit sloppier than other areas, right? And some areas maybe deep, some areas are a little bit more shallow, a little bit more narrow. So and just like the case with all of the battles we have seen so far, any time in the Seerah we find ourselves in a time of war and a time of battle, it's a little bit challenging to piece the events and the chronology of the events together. And it's actually especially more difficult for the Battle of Al-Khandaq. Why? Because at least for the Battle of Badr, for the Battle of Uhud, we're talking about the whole battle from start to end, few hours. The whole battle, start to end, is a few hours. Battle of Al-Khandaq was less of an actual battle, it was more of a siege. And the siege lasted, according to Ibn Ishaq, around 30 days. So for almost an entire month, the Muslims were sieged within Medina. They only had 6 days or so to build the trench. So maybe in total, from the beginning of digging the trench to the end of the actual battle, we're talking about 40 days or so. So now when we get a report that Sahabi fought this person, or an arrow was shot, or this took place, or that took place, okay, when did it happen? Did it happen on day one? Is it in the middle? Is it in the end? So it becomes especially more challenges. So again, this is an effort that is done by the scholars of the Seerah, and that's what we're going to try to get across, inshallah. Now, it is mentioned that in their efforts to try to cross the trench, some of the enemies were actually successful. So they basically found a gap in the trench, or a place that was very narrow and shallow. So they were able to somehow cross through them. And we're told a bunch of names here. One of them is a man by the name of Amr ibn Abdi Wud. and another is Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, and it mentions around 6 or 7. So it's a small number. Out of the 10,000, only like 6 or 5 of them were able to actually cross across the trench. وخرج علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام في نفر معه من المسلمين. So when they heard that there were around 6 enemies that crossed the trench, Ali bin Abi Talib, he came out with a group of Muslims to fight them. And Ibn Ishaq, he mentions, in the narration, that Ali fought Amr ibn Abd Wud. But interestingly, subhanAllah, before he began fighting him, he actually gave him da'wah. SubhanAllah, like they were literally facing each other. Both of them have their weapons out. They know each other because they're both from Quraysh. And so the first thing that Ali says, إِنِّي أَدْعُوكَ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَإِلَى رَسُولِهِ وَإِلَى الْإِسْلَامِ. That I am, or Amr, I invite you to worshipping Allah and follow the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to accept Islam. But Amr responds, لا حاجة لي بذلك. I have no need for any such thing. And so Ali says to this, فَإِنِّي أَدْعُوكَ إِلَى النِّزَالِ. If that's the case, you don't want to accept, then I am challenging you right now to a fight. Now, pause here for a second. Amr ibn Abd Wud is a senior man from amongst the Quraysh. He's a little bit, older. He's not elderly, but he's older in age. Whereas Ali bin Abi Talib, he's still a, young adult, you can say. So Amr responds to him and he says, "Lima ya ibn akhi?" That, oh my nephew, why do you want to fight me? فَوَاللَّهِ مَا أُحِبُّ أَنْ أَقْتُلَكَ. Like, out of all the people that I could kill, I would not want to kill you. Like, you're just a kid. But Ali bin Abi Talib, of course, maybe he's a kid. He looks like a kid from the outside, but he has the heart of a lion on the inside. And he says, and he responds back, he snaps back at him, لَكِنِّي وَاللَّهِ أُحِبُّ أَنْ أَقْتُلَكَ. But I would love to kill you. You don't want to kill me, but I would love to kill you. So this made Amr very angry, and so he charged at Ali, and they fought until Ali, in the battle, he struck Amr's leg, which made him fall, and Ali struck the face of Amr, and he eventually finished him off. And as for the rest of the attackers, it seems like there was a little bit of a fight, like a little bit of an exchange, but nothing really happened there, and they ended up simply retreating back. So they crossed the trench again, and they retreated back to their base. And a lot of the incidents that we're going to see throughout the Battle of the Trench are along the same lines. Despite the armies being very, very big and many tribes are being involved, the actual number of casualties in the entire Battle of the Trench, you can count them in two hands. Just because the nature and of the actual battle itself. So for the most part, majority of the incidents, it was just, you would see the mushrikun, either the Muslims and the mushrikun fighting from across the trench, they're shooting arrows at each other, or one of the mushrikun, he crosses the trench and there's a little bit of a fight, either someone gets injured or someone retreats or whatnot. Now it does seem, however, by reading through the narrations and the ahadith, that on particular days the fighting was much more severe compared to some other days. Again, which days we don't really know, but it is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. This is from Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu anhu. أن عمر بن الخطاب, so he's talking about Umar al-Khattab, جاء يوم الخندق بعدما غربت الشمس. So he came on the day of al-Khandaq, on one of the days, and the sun had already set. فجعل يسب كفار قريش, and so Umar got very angry, and he began cursing at the leaders of Quraysh. And he said, يا رسول الله ما كدت أصلي العصر حتى كادت الشمس تغرب. Basically, Ya Rasulullah, I missed my Asr prayer because they didn't even give me a second to breathe from how intense the fighting was. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والله ما صليتها. You're not the only one. I also missed it, subhanAllah. So even the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم, he missed Salatul Asr during the Battle of Al-Khandaq. Of course, for a valid excuse, not like the excuses that we have today. He was in the middle of a very fierce battle. فقمنا إلى بطحان فتوضأ للصلاة. So they got up, they went to an area and they made wudu. وتوضأنا لها فصلى العصر بعدما غربت الشمس. And so he prayed Asr even though Maghrib had already entered. ثم صلى بعدها المغرب. So after he prayed Asr, then he prayed Maghrib. Now, and in another authentic hadith, also narrated by Ali bin Abi Talib, he says, Ali says, شغلونا يوم الأحزاب عن صلاة العصر. So he says maybe it could be the same salah or it could be a different Salatul Asr. Some narrations it mentions that several salahs were missed, across the duration of the battle. So it could be very well be also Salatul Asr, but in a different day. So he says that they distracted us on the day of Al-Ahzab from praying Asr. حتى سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول, I heard him say, شغلونا عن الصلاة الوسطى صلاة العصر ملأ الله قبورهم وبيوتهم أو أجوافهم نارا. That the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was very angry. He was very angry at this, and he says, they have distracted us from the Salatul Wusta, he calls it, the middle prayer, Salatul Asr. May Allah fill their graves and their houses and their stomachs with fire. So he was obviously very, very irritated. Now, footnote here, there is a little bit of a controversy between the scholars of when Salatul Khawf was revealed. There is a special salah that is called Salatul Khawf, okay? And I'm not going to go into it, all of this ruling, but to just define what is Salatul Khawf, it's a special way of offering prayer in special times, in special occasions, especially during times of fear, right? It's called Salatul Khawf. In times of fear, and more specifically in times of war. So it's a special type of prayer that Allah Azza wa Jal taught the Muslims to do in the middle of a battlefield, so that they can not miss their prayer even as they are fighting. So there is a controversy between the scholars at this point in time in in the Battle of Al-Khandaq. Was Salatul Khawf prescribed or was it not? And if it was prescribed, why did they not pray? Allahu Alam. So whether if Salatul Khawf is not prescribed, it makes sense why they did not pray, because they could not have time. But even if it was prescribed, the scholars, they said that the fighting was that intense that Salah could not even come to their mind. That they were so preoccupied with the fighting that the thought of Salah didn't even cross their mind until it cooled down a little bit. And from this incident also we derive a little bit of fiqh, right? What is the ruling of when it comes to missing a certain obligatory salah unintentionally? And this is important. Unintentionally missing a salah. Maybe you were sleeping, you slept early, you set 10 different alarms and whatnot, and you did not wake up for Fajr, and you woke up after the sun had already been out. Or you genuinely completely forgot about salah. It just completely skipped your mind. This is of the applicable excuses that are the allowed excuses for someone who misses their obligatory prayer. In this and this is only actually one of two incidents in the entire Seerah where we see the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam missing any salah. So one of them was in the Battle of Al-Khandaq, and the other came a little bit later in the Seerah. They missed Salatul Fajr. And from this, we learn also that when it comes to making up a prayer that you missed unintentionally, you do it in the order of the prayers that you missed. Okay? So in this case, he missed Salatul Asr, and it was time for Maghrib. So before offering Maghrib, he says, let's make up Salatul Asr first, then you pray Maghrib. Unless the time is really tight. Like you realize there's only 5 minutes left till Maghrib, and you haven't prayed Asr or Maghrib. Ideally, you should never find yourself in this circumstance, but if you do, you make sure you pray Maghrib first. You don't want to miss the obligatory prayer, then you make it up. So, but the general ruling is you do it in the order of the salawat. Now, as a footnote in the footnote, if someone intentionally misses their salah, the scholars differ. And I'm not going to go into the different opinions of the scholars and whatnot. Some of the scholars, they tell you, it's a major sin, obviously. You have to make. Some of them they tell you have to make up the prayer. Some of them they say there's no making up the prayer, because it's something you missed intentionally, and your making up is by sincere repentance to Allah Azza wa Jal for you not to miss that prayer again in your life. So Allahu A'lam, that's kind of a separate issue, not relevant right now. But also from this authentic hadith, we also see interesting wording. He calls Salatul Asr as-Salatul Wusta, and in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah Azza wa Jal says, حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى وقوموا لله قانتين. That make sure you safeguard your prayers, and specifically as-Salatul Wusta. Now the scholars, they differ. What is the Salatul Wusta? From this incident, it seems likely that this is actually Salatul Asr. So anyhow, while all of this was taking place, while this fighting and all that was taking place, another catastrophe was brewing, was getting cooked up, and nobody was aware of it. And subhanAllah, like the situation was bad enough as it is. Like we mentioned, it was in the middle of winter, cold weather, cold nights. It was so cold, the Sahaba would have to go into their tents. They would have to warm themselves a little bit before they go out again and they fight or they do whatever they need to do. And the Sahaba, they're tired, there's nothing to eat, they're cold. And subhanAllah, in the middle of such a dreadful incident, they literally they were hit with the final blow, which really, really shook their hearts to their core and terrified them like nothing else. And that was that the Banu Qurayza has publicly declared their betrayal to the treaty. Worst timing possible. You have 10,000 people outside Medina. It's taking everything out of the Muslims to defend themselves from the external attack. Now they have to worry about an internal attack. Like worst timing possible. They were supposed to come and side with them against the external enemy, but now they said, we have nothing to do with you. And they said that they're going to fight the Muslims. So, and subhanAllah, Salama also narrates, she, just paraphrasing, she says, I witnessed many battles with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she says, you know, I witnessed Al-Muraisi', I witnessed Khaybar, I witnessed Hudaybiyah, I witnessed Fath Makkah, I witnessed all of these battles, and in some of them there was a lot of terror and there was a lot of fear, but none of them were even as nearly terrifying as the Battle of Al-Khandaq for us, because the Muslims were in the worst situation possible. Like we had to worry about an external enemy, and now not just about the external enemy, now they had to worry not just for themselves, they had to worry for their own women and children, because the women and children back in their homes, back in in some of the places that were protected by the Muslims, but now how are we supposed to protect 10,000 from the outside and around 2,000 now from inside Medina? They're within the trench, so they don't have to cross any trench. So now what exactly happened? What are the events that led for this treaty to get broken? We have to rewind a little bit. And Ibn Ishaq, he narrates the full incident in a lot of details. And he says, وَخَرَجَ عَدُوُ اللَّهِ يَحْيَى بْنِ أَخْطَبٍ Huyay ibn Akhtab. Huyay ibn Akhtab, the leader of Banu Nadir. And we already spoke about him before in the expulsion of Banu Nadir. So we mentioned that Huyay, he had it in his heart, he's the one who actually instigated this entire battle, right? He's one of the instigators. So he had it in his mind that I am going to go and get my revenge against the Muslims by, what's it called? By instigating something between the last Jewish tribe and the Muslims, by creating fire between them. So he came to the tribe of Banu Qurayza. حتى أتى كعب بن أسد. كعب بن أسد. The leader of Banu Qurayza, his name is Ka'b ibn Asad. وكان قد وادع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على قومه وعقده على ذلك وعاهده. But prior to this incident, Ka'b ibn Asad, he had met up with the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم and he had promised, we are still with you, we are still honoring the treaty, we don't plan on breaking it. He gave all of these promises, and this is why we will see probably in the next class or so why the consequences for the Banu Qurayza were much more severe compared to the other Jewish tribes that simply got away with expulsion. And so he came over, as Huyay ibn Akhtab, he came over to Ka'b ibn Asad. فلما سمع كعب بحيي بن أخطب أغلق دونه باب حصنه. That as soon as Ka'b ibn Asad heard that Huyay ibn Akhtab is on his way to our tribe, he closed the doors and he locked them. He did not want anything to do with Huyay ibn Akhtab. فاستأذن عليه فأبى أن يفتح له. Huyay ibn Akhtab comes, he arrives at the door, knock, knock. He says, I'm not going to open the door. You're not welcome here. I'm not going to open the door. So Huyay knocked and again asked for permission to come in. And he says, oh, Ka'b, let me in. And so Ka'b says to him behind the door, and he says, وَيْحَكَ يَا حُيَيْ إِنَّكَ امْرُؤٌ مَشْؤُومٌ. That, oh Huyay, just the fact that you are coming to us, this is a bad superstition for us. This is a bad omen. This This is a sign of some you're bringing some bad luck with you. Like we don't want anything to do with you, Mr. Huyay. Okay? And he says, وَإِنِّي قَدْ عَاهَدْتُ مُحَمَّدًا, and I have a treaty with Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. فلست بناقض ما بيني وبينه ولم أر منه إلا وفاء وصدقا. And I'm not going to go and break that treaty between me and Muhammad because I have seen nothing from him other than honesty. So Huyay, once again, he's banging on the door. Yeah, Ka'ab, just open the door. Let me talk to you. Let me speak with you. Ka'ab once again insists, I'm not going to open the door. Just khalas, get out of here. I'm not going to open the door. Final answer. So Huyay, he still insists, but he changed his tactic a little bit. And he says, والله إن أغلقت دوني إلا عن جشيشتك أن آكل معك منها. That, oh Ka'ab, the only reason that you're not opening the door right now is because you're too greedy to even share your food with me. Like, meaning he's playing with his emotions here. He's telling, like, I'm your ally, Huyay ibn Ka'ab. We had, our friendship goes way back. And this is, I'm coming here as a traveler. It's a cold night. I'm all alone. I don't have a place to stay. And here you are. You're so greedy. You won't even open the door for me, and you won't even feed me any food. So he changes his tactic. So this worked on Ka'b ibn Asad, and it softened his heart. And so he opened the door. And so Huyay says to him, he's trying to convince him, and he says, وَيْحَكَ يَا كَعْبْ جِئْتُكَ بِعِزِّ الدَّهْرِ وَبِبَحْرٍ طَامٍ. Ya Ka'b, I have come to you with strength beyond your imagination. Like the mightiest strength you have ever seen in your life. جِئْتُكَ بِقُرَيْشٍ عَلَى قَادَتِهَا وَسَادَتِهَا. I have come and brought for you Quraysh and all of its leaders and all of its noblemen and seers. وَبِغَطَفَانِ عَلَى قَادَتِهَا وَسَادَتِهَا. And I have also brought you the tribes of Ghatafan and all of its leaders and all of its seniors and all of these people. وقد عاهدوني وعاقدوني على أن لا يبرحوا حتى نستأصل محمدا ومن معه. And they gave me all of their promises that they shall not leave Medina until they destroy Muhammad and his companions. So he's trying to convince him, and he's telling him, like, bro, like, khalas, come to our side, right? It's an easy win. It's a free win. We've got over 10,000 people. They're barely holding up. If you just join our side, then khalas, you guys are going to be good. But even with this, Ka'b was still hesitant to accept the offer of Huyay. And he says to him, and he responds, جئتني والله بذل الدهر وبجهام قد هراق ماؤه فهو يرعد ويبرق ليس فيه شيء. So basically he gives him a metaphor, and he basically says, you did not come to me with anything. It's none of that what you just said. You're basically, and he describes, he says, you're basically just like a cloud. And from a distance, it looks like it has good water and rainfall and a lot of, good water in it. But when it comes, all it brings is lightning and thunder without rain. Like, basically, all you're bringing right now is all talk. You're all bark and no bite, right? You're promising things, and what's actually going to happen is something else. So, subhanAllah, like, even Ka'b ibn Asad's instincts, they're warning him that something is off about this. I should not trust Huyay ibn Akhtab. But Huyay, he kept talking to him, he kept trying to convince him, and he kept insisting until he swore to Allah in front of him. He swore to Allah, and he says, لَإِنْ رَجَعَتْ قُرَيْشٌ وَغَطَفَانٌ وَلَمْ يُصِيبُ مُحَمَّدًا أَنْ أَدْخُلَ مَعَكَ فِي حِصْنِكَ حَتَّى يُصِيبَنِي مَا أَصَابَكَ. I swear to you by Allah, if Ghatafan and the Quraysh retreat back to their cities and to their homes before killing Muhammad, then I promise you, my fate is your fate. And I will stay, and I will come and stay in your tribe. Whatever happens to your tribe shall also happen to me as well. Meaning, I will suffer the consequences with you as well. And so with that confidence that he was showing, Ka'b ibn Asad, he decided to agree to this, and he decided to nullify the treaty between him and the Muslims. So you can see Huyay here, he's literally a Yahud, right? SubhanAllah. He's hitting on all of the weak points of Ka'b ibn Asad. He knows that Ka'b deep inside, he's a Jewish person at the end of the day, and he also has the same feelings that the rest of the Banu Israel have towards the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's scared. Ka'b ibn Asad, the reason he's saying what he's saying is not because, oh, we're honorable people. Rather, he's scared of what will happen to him. He already saw it happen to the two previous tribes, whom he thought were, strong, and they had the ability to defend, and they were kicked out like it was nothing. So he was obviously scared, but Huyay now with coming with all of these promises and assurances, he's telling him, bro, there's no way we're going to lose this, okay? 100%, we have all of these armies, we have all of these tribes with us. So, and he was so confident that he says, like, I am putting my life with whatever happens to your tribe. Like, if something happens to your tribe, whatever happens to your tribe will happen to me. And typically, you don't say something like this unless you are like so 100% sure that like you're 200% sure that it's not going to happen, right? But subhanallah, his words came to bite him later on. Now, that being said, that was happening secretly between Huyay and the Banu Qurayza. How did the Muslims actually come to find out about this? How did they actually receive the news? The answer doesn't seem to be very clear. We don't actually have something fully clear in the books of Seerah that tell us that this was how the Muslims heard. There are a couple of narrations. One of the authentic hadith, it mentions Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, that and it says that the Rasul ﷺ, he addressed the Muslims and he says, "Man ya'tina bi khabari al-qawm," who shall come and inform us about the news of what is happening with these people. And so Az-Zubayr ibn Awam, he volunteered himself 3 times and he said, "Ana," like he said, "Me." The Rasul ﷺ asked again to see if anyone else. Az-Zubayr again raised his hand. The 3rd time he also raised his hand, and then the Rasul ﷺ said, "You may go." And then he said the famous expression, لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ حَوَارِيٍّ وَإِنَّ حَوَارِيَّ الزُّبَيْرِ, that to every prophet there is a special, a strong supporter or a disciple. And my disciple is Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. Now, some scholars, they take this hadith and they say that from this incident, and again, and from other similar hadith that are worded similarly as well, they say that the Rasul ﷺ actually here, he was sending Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam to spy or to monitor the movement of Banu Qurayza, because he was not very comfortable with them, even if they gave them the promises. So that Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam was keeping an eye on them, and that he noticed some movements from their tribe that seemed to imply that the treaty was broken. And so if we were to take this version, it means that Az-Zubayr was the one to return and to tell the Rasul ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, it seems like Banu Qurayza is breaking their treaty. There is now another incident. This one is mentioned in all of the books of Seerah. And if we were to take this incident, this without any doubt exposes to the Muslims that Banu Qurayza have broken the treaty. What took place? As Ibn Ishaq, he narrates this, and he says, كانت صفية بن عبد المطلب في فارع حصن حسان بن ثابت. So some of the women and the children, they were staying protected in the fortress owned by Hassan ibn Thabit. Hassan ibn Thabit is a poet. And Hassan ibn Thabit, we'll talk about him in a second, but Hassan ibn Thabit, he's a poet, he's not a warrior. He's not a fighter. So actually, out of all of the women and all of the children and all of the men in Medina, Hassan was the only man who stayed behind with the women and children and the elderly people. Even though he was a young man and he had the strength to fight, but subhanallah, he had a fear of fighting. Okay? And so some of the Sahaba, they use strong words to describe Hassan ibn Thabit. They call him Ijaban, that he was a coward. But Hassan ibn Thabit, he basically has this where, if he holds a sword, he starts shaking. Like he simply cannot, he can't hold a sword and fight against someone else. So he stayed behind with the women and the children. وكان حسان فيه مع النساء والصبيان. قالت صفية. So Safiya binti Abd al-Muttalib, the aunt of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she's the one who is narrating this. She says, I was seeking refuge in this fortress, in the fortress of Hassan ibn Thabit. فمر بنا رجل من يهود فجعل يطيف بالحصن. That there was a man who was from the Jewish tribe, and he kept going around our fortress. And it appears like Allah, he was trying to look for a way in, because obviously a fortress, it's closed up. He's trying for a way to sneak into the fortress. وَلَيْسَ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ أَحَدٌ يَدْفَعُ عَنَّا. And at that point in time, we had nobody to defend us against the Banu Qurayza. وَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَالْمُسْلِمُونَ فِي غَوْرِ عَدُوِّهِمْ. that the Muslims and the Rasul ﷺ were too busy, were already way too occupied, just trying to repel the incoming attack. قالت فقلت يا حسان إن هذا اليهودي كان ترى يطيف بالحصن وإني والله ما آمنه أن يدل على عورتنا من وراء من يهود فانزل إليه فاقتله. That she told Hassan ibn Thabit that, Hassan, as you can see, there is a Jewish man who's acting very suspicious around us, and I think he has bad intentions. He's trying to come and attack us. Mr. Hassan, you're the man of the house. Grab your weapon and go and fight him. Go and deal with him. So he responds and he says, والله لقد عرفت ما أنا بصاحب هذا. That Safiya, he says to it like, and he's all embarrassed, and he says, Safiya, you know, I'm not the person for this job. He just words it that way. You know that I'm not the person for this job. So she narrates and she says, فاحتجزت ثم أخذت عمودا. So Safiya says, I decided to take matters in my own hands. SubhanAllah. Like, this is a lady, and this is like straight out of a Hollywood movie. SubhanAllah. ثم نزلت من الحصن إليه فضربته بالعمود حتى قتلته ثم رجعت إلى الحصن. So she notices that there is this man sneaking around the fortress. So she sneaks up behind him as he's trying to sneak into the Hassan. And she comes from behind him and he kills him. She kills him with her two hands. And she then went back to the fortress. And then she says, يا حسان انزل إليه فاسلبه فإنه لم يمنعني من سلبه إلا أنه رجل. That, خلاص, Mr. Hassan, I have done the job for you. I've killed the man. But now go down there and take his armor and take his weapons from him. And because she said, I would have done it, but because he's a man and I'm a woman, this is inappropriate. So you're the man over here, so go do this. And so he says, ما لي بسلبه من حاجة. I don't need his armor or weapons or anything like that. Let's just leave him be. So now this incident shows us many different things. Now, first and foremost, it's easy to judge Hassan ibn Thabit in this case, and to and even as we read some of the narrations of Sahaba, as I mentioned, where they call him a coward, it's wallahi very easy for us to pass verdicts and descriptions. And we've never been in this kind of situation, and probably none of the men who exist in today's time, because subhanAllah, just because of the environment that we've been raised in, that we're free of any war and we're so used to peace and all of that. Wallahi, if I myself, I was there, I would be worse off than Hassan ibn Thabit. And subhanAllah, it also shows us that Allah Azza wa Jal created everybody differently. And every person has their own strengths and his own weaknesses. And every person has their own role to play. Some of the men were known for their bravery and for their strength. Some of them were not known as much for their strength, but they were known for their Quran. Some of them were not known for their Quran, but they were known for their military strength, for their military intelligence. Some of them were not known for any of that. They were known for their poetry. And so everybody has a set of strengths and weaknesses. And subhanAllah, at the end of the day, Sahabi is still a human being. And not every Sahabi is perfect. The Sahaba, for the most part, yes, they were brave warriors. They went on ghazawat and sariyas, and they fought, and they conquests and all of these things. But that does not necessarily mean that every single Sahabi had this attribute of bravery, because subhanAllah, sometimes as Muslims, and just out of our love towards the Rasul and the Sahaba and whatnot, we always have to paint the Sahaba as like this superhuman image. Like they are, mashallah, they're undefeated, they're strongest people, they're the most handsome people, they are just the best in every single quality. And we have to be realistic here. And we say this not to put down the Sahaba or anything, rather just because we say this to be realistic. None of us are perfect. The Sahaba weren't perfect either. That's why I looked up at the Sahaba. Because if the Sahaba were perfect in everything, how can I call the Sahaba my role models? How can I follow their footsteps? But when I see someone like Hassan ibn Thabit, yet he's still a Sahabi, and he's still regarded as one of the really well-respected Sahaba, then subhanAllah, this gives people like me hope that I might not be skilled at everything, but maybe I can use the thing that I know I'm skilled at, my specialty, I can use that for the sake of the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. And let's look at Hassan ibn Thabit for a second. Who is Hassan ibn Thabit? First of all, he is the official poet of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. When we say official poet, it doesn't just mean like, oh, he's staring out the window and then all of a sudden, whoosh, the thought comes to his mind, let me write some poetry. No. Whenever the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was attacked, not necessarily physically, but in terms of mockery, the first man to stand up and defend him, the most powerful, who would cut down the enemies of the Rasul ﷺ, not with his swords, but with his tongue, was Hassan ibn Thabit. The Rasul ﷺ, he even said, the hadith is Sahih hadith, he would tell Hassan, whenever someone would try to harm the Rasul ﷺ, he would look to Hassan and he would say, Hassan, get up, qum ya Hassan, go and defend me, and Jibreel is with you. Jibreel is with you, subhanallah. Who has this kind of honor? This is Hassan ibn Thabit. So, this incident, it's a little bit of a funny incident when we get to kind of reflect over it, but at the same time, it gives us a little bit of hope, and it shows us that, no matter what your weaknesses are, no matter who you are as a Muslim, okay, maybe Quran is not your strongest point, okay, you just try to memorize, you struggle with tajweed, you make 10, you just can't. You're trying to do memorize and hadith and go into scholarship, but it's just not clicking. You're like, I am not that type of person. Well, in that case, what type of person are you? Ask yourself that question instead of just pausing at that. Find something that you know you are good at, a skill that you know is beneficial, and use it. Use your strength for the benefit of the Muslim community. If everybody plays their role in our Muslim community, then wallahi, we would rise up to the top. But every single person has a role to play. Don't let shaitan get to you and start telling you, you're not even a sheikh, you're not even someone who knows the Quran, you're barely even practicing, you barely know how to recite properly. Don't let shaitan get to you in that way. A true Muslim, you don't dismiss your shortcomings, you work on your shortcomings, but you don't let your shortcomings be an obstacle for spreading goodness around. So anyhow, so if we were to take this incident, then clearly now the Muslims are aware that the Banu Qurayza have broken the treaty. And so it would be very reasonable to think that the news reached the Rasul ﷺ through someone who was close to the fortress at the time. So when the Rasul ﷺ heard about this news, he wanted to confirm. فبعث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سعد بن معاذ and Sa'd ibn Ubadah and a few others with them, Abdullah ibn Rawaha and others as well. So he sent like 4 leaders or so, and he sent them to the Banu Qurayza to ask them specifically, ask them clearly, are you with us or not? And he gave them special instructions. انطلقوا حتى تنظروا أحق ما بلغنا عن هؤلاء القوم أم لا. He basically tells them, go and see, is it true what we have just heard? فإن كان حقا فالحنوا لي لحنا أعرفه ولا تفتوا في أعضاء الناس. That basically, if you find out that this news of betrayal is true, then give me the news indirectly. Like give me a phrase that I would understand what you mean, but the people would not understand what you're saying. You don't want to create panic among the people. But if وَإِن كَانُوا عَلَى الْوَفَاءِ فِيمَا بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ فَاجْهَرُوا بِهِ لِلنَّاسِ. But if they were actually still with us and they were still true to their treaty, then it's okay. Go say it in front of everybody that, don't worry, the Banu Qurayza are with us. فَخَرَجُوا حَتَّى أَتَوْهُمْ. They went and they saw him, and they went to the Banu Qurayza, they knocked at them, they opened the door and they faced them. So they told them the situation, and they told them, we want to know, are you with us or are you against us? Is this treaty between you and the Rasul ﷺ and the Muslims still active, or did you guys break it? What was the response? And they said, Man Rasulullah? Who is Rasulullah? لا عهد بيننا وبين محمد ولا عقد. We don't know any Rasulullah, we don't know any Muhammad, and there is no treaty, and there is no nothing between us. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh got very, very angry. فَشَاتَمَهُمْ وَشَاتَمُوهُ. So he began swearing and cursing at them. He became very angry, and they started swearing and cursing back at him, until Sa'd ibn Ubadah he tells Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, دع عنك مشاتمتهم فما بيننا وبينهم أربى من المشاتمة. That, oh Sa'd, don't waste your time swearing at them. Right now our situation is much more severe than you don't have the luxury of the time right now to be swearing at them back and forth. Okay, the situation is much more severe than this. ثم أقبل سعد وسعد ومعهما, so they went back to the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم فسلموا عليه. They said السلام عليكم عضل والقارة. That's what they said. عضل والقارة. What is عضل and what is القارة? These are the names of the tribes that, back to the incident of the massacre of Al-Raji'. Remember? When there was a tribe that came to, these tribes, they came to the Rasul, they said, we accepted Islam. We just need you to send some people to us to help us teach us Islam. And then they they lured them to a certain place and they ambushed them and they killed the Muslims. So he said, Udal wal Qarra. They just mentioned the names of these tribes to indicate the same betrayal is now happening. So it's betrayal. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الله أكبر أبشروا يا معشر المسلمين. Subhanallah, even though this is literally the worst news a person can hear, the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم, he became actually happy at this and he did takbir. He says Allahu Akbar and he says be happy, O Muslims. Be happy, O Muslims. Now, this is of course of the iman and the yaqeen and the certainty that of the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم, because he knows that victory is promised to him. He knows that victory is promised to him. So he knows that this means Banu Qurayza is now ours as well. He knows that this means indirectly that we are going to get the third tribe as well. They got Banu Qaynuqa first, they got Banu Nadir second, and now Banu Qurayza shall also be dealt with finally. Now, at this point, however, many reports indicate that for the Muslims, when they first received such news, their reaction was not Allahu Akbar, right? They said we slept the worst night of our lives. We didn't know what to happen. We didn't know what to expect. Because again, there's 10,000 outside the trench, there's 2,000 inside the trench, and now everybody's in danger. It's not just us, the ones who are fighting. Now our women and our children, our families are completely unprotected. And Allah Azza wa Jal even describes this fear in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal says in Surah Al-Ahzab, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم. So in the second page you will find Allah Azza wa Jal reminding the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم and the believers of the day when all of these armies, collaborated against the Muslims. And he says, إِذْ جَاءُكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُمْ وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ وَإِذْ زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارُ وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرُ وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ. That remember, O Muslims, when they came from above you, the allies, the Ahzab, they came from above you, وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ, and from within you as well, the Yahud from the Banu Qurayza. وَإِذْ زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارُ, and when the eyes became glazed with fear. Your eyes became glazed with fear. وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرُ, and your hearts reached your throats. This is did not physically reach their throats, but it's an expression of fear. And subhanallah, may Allah protect us from any kind of fear like this. But there is a certain level of fear when a person is in a really big life-threatening situation where they feel like their heart is beating at their throat. And so this is the reference. So you guys were absolutely terrified. وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرُ وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ, and you began having thoughts about Allah. That is Allah truly, is Allah actually going to give us victory? Is this actually going to happen? Will Allah actually help us? So some of you started doubting Allah Azza wa Jal. And so subhanAllah, this is, there's so many wisdoms to be extracted from this one ayah. I don't want to take the time from I'll save this until later in terms of, some of the learnings that we learned from the incidents and all whatnot until a later lecture. But subhanAllah, again shows us that Sahaba are not the superhuman, perfect human beings. And rather they also faced fear. And they also first faced uncertainty. They were also tested sometimes so severely that their faith was shaken to its core. And they were tested to some of the point where some of them, in the heat of the moment, they began having these thoughts. And it comes to show you that if this is Sahaba, that in such a severe situation they have these kinds of thoughts, then what about you and me? Again, and this is not meant to telling us to go take it easy on us. But at the same time, when the situation is really, really tough on you, and sometimes, subhanAllah, as soon as you're struck with such a difficult situation, you start having thoughts. Is Allah going to help me? Where's the rizq going to come from? Where is this going to happen? How am I going to get out of this situation? How can Allah possibly get me out? So sometimes a person can have this thought, not because they have no doubt from Allah, not because they're like now having doubts about Islam or whatnot, but subhanAllah, because these thoughts sometimes come. And that does not necessarily mean that you are a bad Muslim. Because look, it happened to people who are much better than me and you. And it also mentions the reaction of the hypocrites as well. Hypocrites were already making excuses as it is, and they had already been saying from the past that Allah and His Messenger have promised us nothing other than it's all false promises basically. And in one narration, it even mentions that one of the hypocrites he said it in a mocking manner, and he said, كان محمد يعدنا أن نأكل كنوز كسرى وقيصر وأحدنا اليوم لا يأمن على نفسه أن يذهب إلى الغائط. So, like astaghfirullah, he says basically that, look, the other day, remember Rasulullah was breaking the rock and he's promising us Syria, and he's promising us the palaces of Persia and Kisra and all of these amazing. And look at us today. One of us is too scared to go and even do his, use the washroom basically, and use his business because he's not sure if he's going to get attacked or not. So he said this, of course, in a form of mockery. And Allah Azza wa Jal said about this to affirm the fear of the Muslims. Allah Azza wa Jal says, هُنَالِكَ ابْتُلِيَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا شَدِيدًا. That at that point in time, the Muslims, the true believers, were severely tested, and they were وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا. Zilzal is typically mentioned to an earthquake. So their hearts were shaken. Their faith, their iman was shaken to the core. And again, this having thoughts about Allah Azza wa Jal, or feeling shaken, is, again, if it happens to me or you, this is not a sign of kufr. It's not a sign of hypocrisy or anything like this. It just means that in this moment in time, your tawakkul in Allah is not 100%. So that's what it really means. But again, put yourself in their shoes. It's a 30-day siege. You've been fighting day and night, and now you're concerned about an internal enemy and whatnot. You're hungry, you're tired, you're dusty, you haven't showered, you haven't seen your family. It's wallahi very understandable for them to have these kinds of thoughts. So next week, inshallah, we'll talk about how could the Muslims possibly get out of this situation. And it's how, like, even if you're right now trying to think, like, what are the possible, how could the Muslims ever possibly come out of this situation? What could they do? Next week, inshallah, we will mention about, subhanAllah, the turning point that came in the form of, like, literally the least expected way possible of how the help of Allah Azza wa Jal could come and change the whole tide of the battle, flip it upside down. We will talk about that bi'idhnillah next week. So we'll pause here for today, and we'll take any questions if there are any. عضل والقارة. So عضل والقارة. So we mentioned this incident a few weeks back. There is a group, one of the group of the tribes. They came and they did a dirty tactic. They did a dirty move. They pretended they were Muslims. They went to the Rasul and they said, "We're Muslims, but we need people to come and help teach us Quran and teach us Islam and whatever." So the Rasul he sent them a small group of people, around 6 or 7 people. And what these people did is that they lured them to a certain area, and they ambushed them, and they ended up capturing them, and they eventually executed all of the Muslims. So the theme here is betrayal. They said something, they promised something, and then they went against their own trust, and they killed, and they were planning to harm the Muslims. Yes. Do the people of Palestine pray Salatul Khawf? Allahu Alam. Okay, I don't know, to be honest, off the top of my head, but it's not unthinkable. Yeah. So it is likely, if it's the situation is so severe, and especially if we're talking about those who are fighting, right? And they need, and at the end of the day, subhanallah, salah, there is no excuse for missing salah even in the battlefield. Even to the people of Palestine, there's no excuse for missing salah. Subhanallah. Yani if yani that's the whole reason of Salat al-Khawf coming down. It's in the middle of the battlefield where Allah Azza wa Jalla is literally telling them. This is something we'll come to later on. And He tells you, like, one group of you, you start the prayer and you pray normally. The other group has their weapons out and protecting that group. And then once they finish, they kind of like do a switch. We'll talk about Salat al-Khawf inshallah once we get there, and ahkam of Salat al-Khawf and whatnot. But Salat al-Khawf came down to tell the Muslims, ya akhi, you're not allowed to miss your prayer, not even in the middle of the battlefield. Subhanallah. So what about us today, yani, whom not even in the battlefield, not even in a threat, when we find, subhanallah, people in a community missing salawat because watching TV, watching YouTube, because of school or university or something, and they justify it and they say, well, I was too busy, I was this and that, subhanallah. When in the middle of the battlefield, you're not allowed to miss the salah. Then, subhanallah, may Allah forgive us for our shortcomings. Any other questions? Banu Nadir. Yes. So Banu Nadir is the second Jewish tribe. They got expelled. Huyay ibn Akhtab is one of the leaders of Banu Nadir. No. No, so Ghatafan was there. They were outside, they were fighting the Muslims. But the one who came to the Banu Qurayza was Huyay ibn Akhtab because he knew them very well, and they knew him very well. As of now, they were not involved in the battle. Right now, they're not involved in the battle. The Banu Nadir is. The Banu Nadir, some of the tribes, so the Banu Nadir, when they got expelled, they went to Khaybar. They went all the way to Khaybar. Then from Khaybar, they sent groups. Okay? They went to the Quraysh, they went to the Ghatafan, to the other people. So they had some of the Banu Nadir with them as well, fighting in the battle. Yeah. Other questions? Yes? How did Huyay get into Medina? Now that's a good question. And it doesn't really mention how he got into Medina. There's two possibilities, okay? Either he snuck through the trench and he remained hidden. He did not fight, he just remained hidden and he snuck. Or he went from the southern side through the Jewish gardens, through the gardens in South Medina. And this, Allahu Alam, seems to be a likely thing because he's familiar with the land of Medina. He knows where to go, he knows the garden. And if it's one person. And it's easy for one person to make his way through the dense plantations of date palm trees, and he knows where he's going, and he knows exactly where the Banu Qurayza is. And the Banu Qurayza, by the way, were at the opposite side. So we mentioned, if you guys remember, we mentioned the mountain of Seerah and the trench up in the north. That's where the Muslims were camped. Banu Qurayza were all the way down in the south. Okay, not too far. Okay, but they were in the southern side. Okay, so it makes a little bit of sense for that to be the possibility of how he actually got into there. Yeah. So they're neighbors, but they're also sectioned. So the Muslims have their place, and the Jewish also have their place. Any other questions? Yes. I'm sorry. The so the right now the Muslims found out that the Jewish were not their allies. Okay, so now they found out they were not allies. But so now there's going to be the issue, the problem, right, between the Muslims and the and so that's what we're going to be talking about later, inshallah. Any other questions? Some questions? Yes. Okay, we'll pause here, inshallah. We'll see بإذن الله, and just make dua, inshallah, we can do the lecture for next week. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.